미스터 마켓의 주기적인 비합리성을 활용하는 투자자는 장기적인 성공을 얻을 수 있다. 단기적으로는 수요와 공급만으로 시장 가격이 결정된다. 새로운 시대라는 말을 경계하라. 과도하게 비싼 주식을 정당화하기 때문이다. 월가는 자신들의 이익과 관계된 강세론에 편향되어 있음을 잊지 말라. 워렌 버핏과 벤저민 그레이엄과 더불어 대표적인 가치 투자자로 꼽히며 제2의 워렌 버핏으로 불리는 바우포스트 그룹의 설립자이자 회장인 세스클라만. 그는 현저히 저평가된 주식을 보유하고 더 나은 대안을 찾을 수 없는 경우에 현금을 보유하는 상향식 가치 투자 전략을 구현하고 있습니다. 클라만은 현금이야말로 리스크를 줄이고 절대 수익을 높여줄 핵심 자산군이라고 말합니다. 시장이 과열된 구간에서는 현금 비중을 늘려놓고 시장에 저평가된 기회가 많아지면 현금을 줄여나갑니다. 현금의 유용성은 투자자가 적절한 시기에 얼마나 기회주의적이고 단호하게 현금을 배치하느냐에 달려있다고 말합니다. 시장의 수익률과 관계없이 알파, 즉 추가 수익을 창출하기 위해 노력한다고 말합니다. 설립 당시 바우포스트 그룹은 2,700만 달러 규모에서 시작했지만 23년 기준 약 250억 달러 규모의 자산을 운용하고 있습니다. 오늘은 워렌 버핏이 손꼽은 가치 투자의 대가 세스클라만의 조언을 들어보도록 하겠습니다. 알파 컨덕터 채널 구독과 좋아요, 알림 설정하시면 최신 영상을 가장 빠르게 시청하실 수 있습니다.
Seth Klarman joins us right now in a Squawk Box exclusive interview. And Seth, first of all, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
You are somebody who shies away from publicity. I've been trying to get you to come on the show for years. So has Andrew. So we are thrilled to have you here today. Let's talk about the book that brought you here.
Great.
This book was first published back in 1934. Bad time for investing for a lot of people as you headed into what was the depths of the recession, of the Great Depression. A lot has changed since that time. And I guess the first question is why? What brought you to come in and revise this and bring this version up to date? What made you do this?
Yeah. So first of all, it was McGraw-Hill called. That's incredibly flattering. I'd had a good experience working on the 6th edition where I was co-editor. And a lot had changed in the last 15 years. And I felt strongly that there were things that needed to be talked about. And finally, I thought I could pull together a great team.
Which you did. There's some pretty impressive contributions that came in. You've got Roger Lowenstein, Todd Combs, James Grant, a lot of people who did this. But what changed so drastically that you felt needed to be addressed over the last 15 years?
Yeah. The first thing is we've been in an everything bubble, I think, that a lot of money has flowed into virtually everything. Historically low interest rates, even zero rates have precipitated that bubble. You've also had a lot of changes in the business world. Technology has accelerated, if anything, and you've seen disruption of all kinds of businesses, which creates challenges and opportunities for investors. So that's another thing. Some asset classes have become increasingly popular. Private credit has had a day in the sun. You've had speculation during that bubble in all kinds of things, from crypto to meme stocks to SPACs, in a way that I think, and the book has some important reminders for people about the dangers of speculation and the importance of remembering what kind of environment you're in.
When Graham and Dodd first wrote this book, you were talking about a nation where the economy was really dominated by factories and railroads. You talk about things like SPACs, like cryptocurrency. It seems like a pretty different world. What is the common thread that kind of ties all of this together and how you look at the markets?
One of the things I really admire about Graham and Dodd writing almost 90 years ago is they knew they were in an unusual environment, being enmeshed in the Great Depression, and yet they tried to write something for the ages. They said, we know this won't be the permanent condition, but we don't know what conditions we will experience. So I think every investor has that challenge, that you have to look at the moment you're in and say, which part of this is real, which part of this may be enduring, and which part of this may look completely different as soon as tomorrow, and how do I position myself, maintaining somewhat of a longer-term perspective, because I think trying to trade day to day is not a game anybody really is well equipped to win.
You're a value investor. What does that mean, and what did you learn from Graham and Dodd?
academic definition of value is buy the stock that's cheapest by the numbers. But I don't think that's what Graham and Dodd wanted. In fact, it's clear that they were talking about earnings power and the growth possibilities in a business, even if they're hard to determine. And so I think value has to be determined for every company. The way I think about the market is not that there are growth stocks and value stocks, but rather that all stocks may hold value, but that all stocks also could potentially be overvalued. So you have to have a mechanism, a rubric for figuring out the value of different kinds of assets, different kinds of businesses, and then figure out which ones are trading particularly mispriced.
I always thought of, or I used to think of value investors as being people who would steer away from growth stocks, that was a dangerous spot that would be hard to kind of figure out. That was pretty interesting that one of your big positions you've taken is in Coinbase. How'd you figure out what the forward earnings are for that? How do you, especially when you start thinking about things that are hard to value, how do you get into that? How do you look at that and say, okay, this is a place that I definitely see value?
Yeah. So I think in a world that's changing as fast as this one, it's really important to think about not just what are the earnings today. The earnings today may not be here tomorrow. They may be disrupted. The business may be gone, or they may be 50 or 100% more. So I think investors need to take into account what are the longer term prospects for a business. I think investors have become vastly more sophisticated these days than in Graham and Dodd's era in terms of thinking about what causes a business to be resilient to competitive threats. Also, Warren Buffett has showed all of us the value of growth, that he thinks hard about some of the highest quality businesses in the world, but only buys them when they're at attractive prices. So I think that's an important element of it as well.
What's gotten more complicated with the markets in the 40 plus years that you've been doing this? And by the way, I should say, when I asked Warren Buffett at one point, like people who could beat the market, because he's long talked about indexing, has always thought that indexing is the way to go. There's probably about 5 people who could actually beat the markets over time. And you're one of the names that he listed on that, which is huge praise from one of the best investors ever. But what's changed for you over time as the markets have gotten more complicated, as there's been more competition? How has your style evolved?
I think you have to almost run harder to stay in place, that you have more competitors, smarter competitors, more information is available at everybody's fingertips. Investors need edge to be successful. They need to think about what is it they know or how are they structured that will allow them to outperform, to create alpha for their clients in a way that buying the average stock won't do. And so we've become a little bit more focused on private investments. We think there's more inefficiencies in some private markets than public markets. We've become more global over time. When we started, we were a couple of people and $27 million, and today we're almost, at $25, $26 billion. So it's really been an evolution in 260 people. I think that you can continue to find edge, though, in how you structure yourself, how you incentivize your team, how you lead your team. You can find opportunities around the edges of what other people are doing, finding situations that other people are throwing out, like the baby with the bathwater. And they exist. You have to be patient. They're not always there. But when they're there, they can be particularly attractive because the markets can become quite frenetic these days.
알파 컨덕터 채널 구독과 좋아요, 알림 설정하시면 최신 영상을 가장 빠르게 시청하실 수 있습니다.
If you could put yourself back now, you were talking about investing and how it's shifted over time. But if you were, and you were also talking about the private markets, how there's a lot more opportunity there. But if you were a kid coming out of college, and we're both alma mater, Cornell, but you graduated in 1979. But if you were graduating today and you had to actually play, if you will, the public markets, do you think that opportunity that you had in 1979 still exists in 2023?
Andrew, it's such a great question. I think that markets can become more efficient. And there's a question in my mind about once a market becomes more efficient, whether it actually does have the likelihood of becoming less efficient afterwards. So for sure, there's more money in public markets, things have become somewhat more efficient. But I also see a short-term orientation that tells me that it's possible some pricing has actually become less efficient. I think when you look at Meta, the stock's been all over the place in a reasonably short period of time, falling to under 100, then rising back up to almost 300, literally months apart, for a large, well-established company that I think everybody can analyze. So I think that there are opportunities. Now, if a kid came to me and said, where do you think I should potentially make my career, I would encourage them to look for the most inefficient pockets in the world. I also think it's important that they get mentored, that most people aren't ready to just jump right into this business right out of school. So I do think there are opportunities, but people should ask themselves, what are my interests? What kind of edge might I have? If you're from a different country, maybe you have great contacts in that country. Maybe you know a lot about the business culture in that country. And so my advice would be to go where you're naturally inclined and go where you think there may be interesting opportunities. Obviously, a market that's setting all-time highs may not be the best place to focus a career.
This may not be about edge, but Warren Buffett's often talked about index funds. Becky was mentioning index funds to you before, which have changed the business. I think that's actually what's made them so much more efficient to a large degree. But do you also subscribe to the philosophy that if you can invest with Seth Klarman, that you should actually be investing in index funds, and that's the safer and best path?
The argument for index funds is that you're going to have low transaction costs, near zero, and you're going to have exposure to the market. You're not going to underperform the market, but neither will you outperform the market. I think for the average person out there who isn't terribly sophisticated and is able to take a long-term view, I don't see anything wrong with index funds. But I think one of the critical things about the long-term return from investing is that it depends on the entry price. So if you enter when the market's very expensive at a high valuation, you may be disappointed because you might match the index, but the index may not do very well from there. So the other thing is you don't want to go into index funds, experience a bad market, and then bail out. That's what investors tend to do. Right. They get in at the wrong time and they get out at the wrong time. And so investors who go into index funds should go in with the idea that they're going to stay through thick and thin.
And you were talking also with Becky about technology. I wanted to understand how you think about the inflection point with a technology company. There, of course, was a point where Amazon might have seemed like a speculation. Today, in retrospect, you wouldn't think that. You might even look at Tesla that way. There are some people in the public market, in the public right now, who think that Bitcoin and various cryptocurrencies are complete and utter speculation. There are others who say 10 years from now, we're going to look back and say that wasn't one. How do you think about that distinction?
Andrew, one of the things that's really important, there's an enormous amount, a fire hose of information coming at all of us all the time. And as an investor, I've learned to try to be focused on things that actually are going to move the needle for me and my portfolio. So I try to focus on bottom-up individual situations, stocks, bonds, real estate transactions, and I don't spend a lot of time thinking about things where I think the answer is pretty imponderable. So I do spend time thinking about technology, and part of that, at least, is to avoid being on the wrong side, to avoid being in a company that gets disrupted. I think something like crypto, which I've tried hard to understand the arguments and figure out why people are so excited about it, and I can't find value there. So I'm not making a judgment that it might not go up. I have no idea. But we focus our time where we think we might spend it productively.
세스클라만의 바우포스트 그룹은 비중을 많이 줄이긴 했지만 리버티 글로벌과 구글에 투자 중이고 피델리티 내셔널 인포메이션 서비스 등을 보유 중입니다. 투자자들은 성공을 위해 자신만의 엣지, 강점이 필요하다고 말합니다. 인상적이었던 부분은 장기 투자 수익에 있어서 가장 중요한 것 중 하나는 진입 가격이라고 말한 것입니다. 높은 밸류에이션에 시장이 비쌀 때 진입하면 시장을 아웃퍼폼하기 어렵고 잘못된 시점에 들어갔다가 잘못된 시점에 나오는 우를 범하는 경우가 많다고 합니다. 인덱스 펀드 역시 좋을 때도 있고 어려울 때도 있다는 걸 알고 투자해야 한다고 조언합니다. 장기적인 가치 투자자가 진입 가격과 시점, 시장의 밸류에이션, 과열 단계를 고려한다는 부분이 인상적이었습니다. 오늘은 세스클라만의 인터뷰를 통해 그의 투자 관점을 들어볼 수 있는 시간이었는데요. 성공한 투자자들의 마인드와 투자 관점을 통해 구독자분들도 저와 함께 자신만의 엣지를 만들어갔으면 좋겠습니다. 오늘 영상도 시청해주셔서 감사합니다. 다음 시간에 더 유익한 내용으로 찾아뵙겠습니다. 금융시장 초과 수익 지휘자 알파 컨덕터였습니다.